and welcome to Capitol Hill. I'm Lyndal Curtis. On a day the Labor government would have hoped to be greeted by newspaper headlines about its package of help for Australian industry, it was instead greeted, in the Fairfax press at least, by another opinion poll. And this one, with movements all outside the margin of error, was not pleasant reading. Labor's gone backwards in this one poll, and Tony Abbott is now the preferred Prime Minister. All on a day where the reaction from business to the industry statement was reasonably positive. To discuss the day, we're joined by Labor MP Graham Perrett and Liberal Senator Scott Ryan. Welcome to you both.
G'day, Lyndal.
G'day, Lyndal. G'day, Scott.
We'll turn first to the reaction from two of Labor's cabinet ministers to the Nielsen poll.
It's a wake-up call, isn't it? It's you can't gild the lily. It's where we've been making important progress forward. This seems to suggest back.
There's no sugarcoating it. It's a bad poll today. There's no doubt about it. And I've always thought that, when times are tough, you just got to get going again and argue what you're trying to do to improve things for people in the community. And that's what I'll continue to do, and my colleagues will continue to do.
Graham, if I could come first to you, polls are backward-looking. They're not necessarily a measure of what will happen. Some say the only poll that counts is election day. Are you one of those people?
Well, yeah, I do know that you can, put a bet on who's going to win the grand final now. You can make some judgments based on pre-season form now, but you can't get a bookie to pay you for the grand final today. That's the reality. So, we've got an election date, we've got a lot of policies to sell, and we've got the leader who's going to take us through to that election night. So, I mean, for me, in a marginal seat, I've always seen polls differently. They either give me half a smile or half a grimace, but they don't change anything that I'm doing, because a marginal seat means every day is a day where you get out and do what you can to convince people to vote for you. That's just the reality of marginal seats.
Scott, is it the only poll that counts is the one on election day, or is the only poll that counts the one you're in front in?
Oh, well, I think Graham and I will probably only agree on the fact that the only poll that counts is polling day. What I've seen over the last couple of months, and particularly over the last couple of weeks, is yet again people are frustrated that the government's obsessed with itself. It's navel-gazing. People want the chaos to end. They want a government that's focused on their cost of living, their family, their small business. And that's not what they're getting. They're getting a government that's obsessed with leadership, that's obsessed with internal machinations, or a Prime Minister that tries to play political tricks by announcing election 9 months out.
Graham, Simon Crean called it a discussion about the internals, the debate about within the party about the situation it's in. Is that having an impact in your seat?
Oh, look, any day where we're talking about ICAC or the member for Dobell, Craig Thompson, is a day that I'm not talking about our great economy, our great plan for the future, our investments in education and the NDIS, and that is a distraction. And the reality is, it's quite scandalous, some of that information that has a slight hint of Labor on it. The reality is, it's far removed from what Julia Gillard's on about, far removed from what the Cabinet and the caucus is about, but there's still that bit of history. Then throw in a bit of, those mix of other things that are out there in the mainstream media in terms of speculation, and it detracts from and distracts from the message that we've got to sell to get over the line, which is basically pretty simple. Are people comfortable with the way we're managing the books? There's no point talking about the AAA credit rating from 3 ratings agencies. We need to convince the people of Australia that we're the best possible plan for the future. We're not doing that well.
Are there problems, though, with some own goals Labor has scored? They're having to ditch the surplus after having promised it so strongly, and the fact that the mining tax raised a very small amount of money in the first 6 months of its operation?
Well, look, we certainly did create an expectation out there about the surplus. That is something that people were, that we ran pretty hard on. When we don't resolve from the fact that a surplus is good for the economy, but obviously when the revenue coming in from so many fronts failed to deliver as per Treasury projections, we had to recalibrate. That's what good, sensible government is about. But obviously, with that recent poll, that perception would have rattled people quite a bit. So, the good thing is we've got, you know, around 7 months until the election night, so we can explain this story. Whereas obviously the misinformation that's out there will not play into our hands at the moment.
Scott, is the coalition effectively coasting at the moment, not having to put out finely detailed, costed policies, being able to focus only on the government and in some senses step back from the public debate?
Well, Graham then just highlighted why people are so frustrated with Labor. He mentioned ICAC, he mentioned Craig Thompson, he mentioned the failure to deliver a budget surplus, even though he says it's important. He just can't deliver it, and his government can't deliver it. The opposition and Tony Abbott since the start of the year have been talking about what we plan to do. You know, our plan for the manufacturing sector, our plan for the services sector, our plan for agriculture. That's what we've been doing since the start of the year, because people crave a government that is interested in them, not itself.
But you also haven't outlined, for the most part, some of your big spending policies, like how the value of tax cuts you're offering, and indeed how you pay for many of the things, and plans for, such as the discussion paper on Northern Australia, aren't even policies yet.
Well, we heard last week in Senate estimates that we simply can't trust the numbers from this government. We know that the most recent update, which was the mid-year budget update, is already out of date. Wayne Swan himself has said that. They've said they won't give us any new numbers until May, and the past record has been those have been out by tens of billions of dollars within months. And so we're not going to see from the Treasury and Department of Finance independent numbers untouched by the hands of the Labor government that we can trust and the Australian people can trust until the election campaign. You know, we're not going to do what Labor does and promise the world and deliver smoking ruins. We are only going to promise what we can deliver, and for that we need real numbers that the Labor Party refused to give us.
Does that mean then, Scott, that the sorts of things you've promised already you might have to scale back?
No, we've made promises. We are not going to complete our suite of promises in the announcement until we've actually seen the final numbers. What we've promised, we will deliver, but we're not going to make promises that we cannot be certain we will deliver.
Scott, that is an incredible slur to say the people in Treasury, operate at the behest of the Labor Party. They're the same people who worked for John Howard. They're the same people that will serve the Australian people into the future. That's an incredible accusation.
No, Graham, we know that the budget documents are the property. They are signed off by the Treasurer and the Finance Minister. The Department of Treasury and the Department of Finance has made that clear over and over again. The election financial
rely on
update
the figures provided by them in terms of projections.
Well,
they are not political figures.
No, they are signed off by the Treasurer, and we heard that about the mining tax last week when the Treasury said it wasn't really involved in the negotiations and wasn't certain about the numbers.
That's a different process altogether, Scott. So.
I might move on now to the issue of policy, and the Prime Minister says the industry and innovation statement will help get more local industry work, help get them involvement in major projects. Here's what she had to say today.
If you have a big project, more than $500 million, then instead of just looking to your global supply chain and saying, well, if we were doing this in a dozen other countries around the world, we'd use the following suppliers because we always do, having an obligation to look and see if an Australian business can do that work for you. Now, I think that's fair enough.
You can't regulate your way to prosperity, and Labor doesn't understand that. And therefore, they keep looking at ways to increase regulation, thinking that that regulation is going to deliver more jobs. It won't. What delivers more jobs is innovation, innovation based on risk, and risk-taking is based on having a set of rules for the economy that are consistent and predictable and ensure that people are rewarded for their effort, rewarded for their risk and their innovation. Labor just doesn't get it.
Scott, how is getting, say, business and research institutions together to innovate, how is getting at least the input of local industry into major projects regulation?
Well, no, what the Labor Party's proposed is setting up a new bureaucracy to try and see greater local content in projects. Only a delusional Labor Party would think regulating the internal behaviour of a business is going to create more jobs.
But there's no compulsion on business to do so. No, but it's a regulatory burden. It
requires them to have procurement officers in place that oversee their supply chains. But to go to the most damaging element of this, you know, CSL, the place that is the Australian champion in the medicines industry, that played a role in inventing the vaccine against cervical cancer, that's going to lose its access to the R&D tax concession. That's insane, to be nobbling our champions.
But it's still, big businesses will lose access to the 125% tax concession, but they can still write off their R&D spending on tax, can't they?
Yeah, but why would you actually take away those larger businesses that not only have a track record, but also have the greatest capacity to support R&D in Australia? We're taking them out and saying, you can't access the R&D tax concession. But if you look at their track record, the big miners, CSL, they've got a fantastic record in R&D. It's something that they should be encouraging, not stripping.
Graham, in the effort to find savings to fund the rest of the package, the government has done that, taken away the big tax concessions for R&D from some of the biggest companies. Would it have been better to keep that tax concession there for the big companies?
The reality is, and what Scott failed to reveal there, is that Australian companies are some of the best in the world. Our farmers are the best, our miners are the best, and our manufacturers, and when it comes to innovation, we will hold our own with the world. But we need to be on a level playing field. We need to be given a go. Now, for mining companies is to come into the northwest of Australia, and when much of our manufacturing base is in Scott's backyard, to say, look, we're just going to go straight to China or Singapore or India or somewhere like that in terms of our production lines. That's what we need to say. Have a look at us, Australian suppliers, give us a go. I mean, particularly as a Queenslander, I understand this. I've got a background with the mining industry. I know that we have world-class innovation. At the moment, in Brisbane, we are looking after the health and safety for mines in China. Why? Because we've got the innovation and the background and the research and the throughput, which is very important to fund that innovation. So I think this is a great initiative. It's we only dig these minerals out of the ground once. We should be giving Australian companies a chance to share in some of those profits, and employing Australians and Queenslanders is a pretty good start as far as I'm concerned.
Scott, does the way that the government structured the package mean that the days of governments picking winners look like they're over?
Well, I think, there's a consensus in Australia that government doesn't pick winners. The issue with this package, though, is that, $250 million has been stripped from government support for R&D. They pull away $1 billion, they only hand back just over $750 million. And whether, it's manufacturing or mining or medicine, R&D is not something that only happens in one sector. This package, it rebrands part of the government's failures, it institutes more bureaucracy and red tape for companies, and it takes away money for R&D. On every test for supporting manufacturing in Australia, it is a failure. And on top of that, the single greatest barrier to Australian companies at the moment is the cost base, and the cost base that Labor has made worse on the carbon tax. You speak to any manufacturer and that's what's hitting them hard.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Scott Ryan and Graham Perrett, thank you for joining Capitol Hill today.
Thanks, Lyndal.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you for watching. Capitol Hill will be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, good night.